And welcome back to Antigua Barbuda today. We are dealing with a lot of information today, and joining me on the couch this morning are representatives from Incus Services, A1 Analytic and Automation, Leslie Lee Fook, Management of Business Strategies, Egbert Irving, and from the Ministry of Information, Broadcasting, Telecommunications and Information Technology, Isoki Perry. Welcome to the couch this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Happy to have you, Isoki, on the couch. Happy to have you guys in Antigua.
Thank you.
You're leaving today, aren't you?
I am this evening, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, that sucks. All right, so we're talking about the Analytics Enablement Workshop that has just been concluded. Who wants to start with explaining what analytics are?
So I could give it a stab. So analytics is basically making sense of data. And as the governments, as organizations become more and more digital, more data is being generated. So there's massive opportunity to drive better policies, make better decisions. And this week was that first step towards it.
All right. It's okay. What was the plan in asking for these guys to come in and have the workshop today?
Well, as Leslie mentioned about the data, the government has been an initiative to digitize data. And with the digitization of the data, we then have to use the data to make sense. So the whole aspect and that the ministry had in mind was to be a catalyst, to get the ball rolling, steamroll the process of making sure that the government will be able to use the data that they have in an efficient way to be able to see the trends or to see where things are falling short, to be able to do something better and, you know, of course, make the country run a lot better, generate revenue.
I look forward to that. All right, so tell us about the week and the activities that were held.
Yeah, sure. So this week, this is actually the first type of engagement like this globally. So, you know, many ministries, many agencies have taken 2-3 people from a particular department and started to use data in that department. They really dipped their toes into using data. This government, though, is taking a slightly different approach. They're going a government-wide initiative where we touch everyone across all ministries, across all agencies, and ultimately every citizen as a knock-on effect. So this week we trained 50 people from about 20 different ministries and agencies. At the end of it, we produced 10 prototypes, you know, highly impactful prototypes that can impact every single citizen, that can drive millions of dollars in revenue for the country. And we did this in 5 days.
Sounds like a lot of work.
And 4 days.
4 days. 4 days.
And if you really look at it in terms of its compression, just a few hours.
Yeah.
When you think about it, so it was it had a
Very
significant
involved.
impact.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
All right, let's talk about the areas of impact here in particular. You talked about touching a wide cross-section of governmental agencies. Let's talk about some of those agencies or departments of the government and how we foresee that the workshop will be able to help going forward. Let's talk about tourism. That's our main economic driver.
Sure. So, there are 2 facets of what we did with tourism this week. The first one is actually looking at arrival data, etc., etc. And what they were quickly able to spot is that, you know, Antigua Barbuda has a seasonal activity typically for tourism, but we're able to identify particular markets that are actually on the increase but aren't seasonal.
Okay.
We could have a year-round tourist dollar coming in, pretty much. The other facet that we looked at was the CIU, Citizen by Investment Unit, and we looked at which particular areas, which particular segments, which particular cohorts that we can best focus our limited resources on. Because everybody has limited resources. How do we make the best use of those resources?
Okay, and let's touch on healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a very important aspect of, right, and we're all concerned about, for example, waiting time. When we go to a clinic or we go to the hospital, emergency room. So one of the prototypes actually looked at ways in which the waiting time could be reduced at the emergency room, as well as ways in which that could have an impact on the staff, doctors, for example, and how to redeploy resources, human resources in this case, in a more efficient way. But there were some interesting thing that came out of that as well. For example, you're able to identify a single individual who used the services on a repeated basis. Now, why is that the case? You're able now to drill down to the granular level and see individual cases to see exactly what is happening here, and we can then take pointed decisions in order to resolve some of those issues.
Yeah.
It might be a case of the individual might need additional support at home or in a clinic, and that way you reduce the pressure that's placed on the service provider, the health service provider. So we believe that this has an impact on the individual citizen, not just on the macro scale, but it also has impact on the micro as well.
Yeah, to add some numbers, we actually saw this patient returning 70 times in 3 months.
In a 3-month period, yeah.
I guess I watched too much television and drama here, but could this be drug addiction? I'm just kidding. Okay, and not that we have this problem in Antigua, but crime.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those.
So we did some crime analyses, and they were able to now come up with new strategies, new ideas, new techniques to again use those limited resources in the most important areas, communities, etc. Types of crime to reduce crime in the country.
So the data set was huge. I think it's 40 years worth of data from 1974.
Wow.
Yeah.
36,000 plus cases. And now you're able then to pinpoint trends, you're able to pinpoint specific location, you're able to do a whole lot with it. And what happens is that this information pops out at you, as opposed to just numbers in a table. It allows you to be much more interactive with the data, and therefore you're able to make much more pointed decisions.
Yeah.
Right, it's okay. You know, we've heard from the local perspective that we don't have data in Antigua, that we don't keep records, we don't have statistics. What I'm hearing here is that we have lots of data that we've actually been able to gather over the years.
We do have a lot of data. And as I said, our ministry has already developed a digitization team. So that is what we're embarking on. So we have already digitized records from the intellectual property. We started at the civil registry. We did some at the hospital. We completely digitized the criminal records at the police, for the police department. So this would be a reason as to why some of these use cases were able to happen.
Great. And what are we hoping will come out of this, to be specific?
Yeah. So I mean, we spoke a lot about social impact, but there's also a lot of revenue opportunities, direct revenue, but also operational efficiencies. Interesting one is customs, for example. So we also looked at customs, and Jamaica customs started to use analytics, and they increased their impacted GDP was 7%. Right? If in Antigua Barbuda, we had half that luck, and we increased GDP here by 3%, we're looking at 240 million US annually for the country.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so huge impact for every single citizen. In terms of next steps for us, we have our next phase of the workshop coming up in November, where we plan to do it maybe 2, 3 times as big, really bring out more use cases, but really accelerate the process to get people in ministries, agencies using data to drive decisions. But it really comes back to, we have a lot of data. Everybody has data. It could be Excel, it could be in some back-end system.
Yes.
But what I've realized is that people don't know how to use the data. So we're trying to build data literacy across the entire region to make the region globally competitive. And in that regard, we want to start with the schools. So one of the next initiatives we should be doing is a program with the ICT cadets.
Right.
Okay. Great. Yeah, to get those into, yeah.
Yes.
So Isoki is going to show us a little of what we actually did within the training sessions. But let's talk about the government's push to become a future island nation. Antigua and Barbuda, one of the very first countries in the region to talk about doing that.
Yes.
How is that going to help us achieve that goal?
Well, first and foremost, just hearing that sounds like a lofty goal. Well, what exactly is that? It sounds like it's somewhere out there, but it's a vision, and you need to have a vision. And the Prime Minister announced, I believe, on Saturday that is where Antigua is going, and he had a specific target: 27,000 tons by the year 2030. If you are responsible for that, how are you going to achieve that target? You are able to create dashboards, you're able to create targets on a day-to-day basis, you're able to monitor exactly where the plastics are coming from, what the tonnage is, exactly who's bringing it in, who are the high achievers.
Yes.
We can learn then some best practices from those who are achieving or exceeding their targets and be able to take those lessons to those who are not. So it's not only about looking at the negative side of it, but also being able to take those best practices and able to cascade that throughout the organization. So by having the vision, strategic objective, you're able then to take it to the operational level on a daily basis, an hourly basis, and monitor exactly where you are hour by hour in terms of achieving that long-term 10-year goal. So that is just one example, and that could be replicated throughout, because it's important to have that strategic alignment from the vision all the way down to the person on the operational level. And oftentimes you find there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
This allows that gap to be bridged.
Yeah, the future island nation, or as a lot of people like to refer to it, Silicon Islands, is not about technology. It's about how we use technology as a catalyst to help citizens.
Great. It's okay, you want to just take us through some of the things that we
Sure.
Yes. Go on, yes.
So what a team did from the immigration department, they were looking into, excuse me, looking at migration patterns. So say for instance, you want to click, this map shows the travel by country of issuance of a passport. So if you click, say for instance, on Canada,
Yes.
it then pulls up all here. The most active ports would be VC Bird and then through Castries, and then you can then see on this side the top arrivals and departures by carriers. So you can see that the Canadian passport holders mostly came by cruise ship. Most of the data would show that most passengers come through cruise ships because the cruise ships obviously hold a larger amount of passengers. And then here you can see the last names of the Canadian passport holders. So if we now decide that we want to choose, let's just say St. Thomas as a port. Oops. So we choose St. Thomas. And then you will see, once again, most of the persons once again came on Carnival.
Yes.
Most of them came through Canada. And here are some last names that are popular for the Canadians. We can use a country like Russia. Most of the Russians came through St. Thomas, once again on a cruise ship. So that was one of the dashboards that we worked on. And basically this was just data, and it wasn't a lot of data, it was limited data sets that the immigration department had, and you can see how easy it is to display information that you need. So I mean, even if you wanted to, as we was coined, the battle of the sexes was this dashboard that was coined. You can see the difference in travel between males and females. So the females had a number of around just under 30,000, and the males had 35,000 worth of persons traveling. So it's just, and if you click on male, you can see most of them came from the US. So the darker color here will just indicate that that's the highest volume of passengers. So it's just very easy to display and easy to look at and understand.
Yes.
So instead of having a PowerPoint presentation and you go through and you click and you this and you that and you're just going through words and hearing stuff, visually you look at something like this and you're like, wow. And then you say, hey, what is this large dot over here? What does that show? And then you can see, okay, that's the last name Fernandez, and we have in our data set 231 records of Fernandez. And even with that, the immigration department may be able to pinpoint, we have all of these Fernandez. Are they part of a family? Why are they moving? You know, why are there so many of them moving? And, you know, through collecting the correct data, you would be able to pinpoint so many different things.
Yes. Wonderfully said. And the funny thing is, though, and I can speak for Antigua and Barbuda, is that we don't like collecting data.
Yes.
I've been a teacher for a number of years, and we hated having to mark the register and then to compile data at the end of every week, at the end of every month to submit to the Ministry of Education. But it is useful. It becomes useful after a while because we can now see that it drives something even greater.
Of course.
I think that last point that you made, we can now see, is ultimately the point. It's not that people don't necessarily like to collect data. And now through digital platforms, it's more automated, obviously. But people don't understand the value of collecting data. I think it's a bigger problem. And I mean, at the end of the workshop, with the limited data sets that we had, we can now figure out what particular countries, what particular cruise lines, what particular channels to market it, to increase our traffic into the country. Right? And when you demonstrate that value, then people start collecting.
So you're back in November, are you?
We are back in
Yes.
November.
So what we're hoping to get out of this is okay. They're back in November. We're planning to tie all this together, do this on a larger scale.
Yeah, so the whole objective in November would be, as you said, a larger scale. Get a lot more persons involved so that they can see. And we did have a little bit of a competition to kind of drive the learning curve.
Okay.
And so we would have had judges. So in the next cohort, we hope to have a little bit, hopefully some ministers, so that they can actually see, because all the dashboards were presented.
Okay.
And you had to have a pitch, you had to have impact. What is the strategy about your pitch and why you created this dashboard? So the ministers will be able to then see and then be like, you know what, oh wow, we can use this.
Yeah.
With the little bit of data that we have, this is what you have already collected. Imagine if we went large scale. Imagine if we figured out our forms, and this field is what we need so that we can really drive these dashboards. That would be amazing. So we're hoping to get a lot more people involved and get the ministers really to understand what this can show.
All right. Final words from Leslie and from Egbert.
Yeah, I mean, my expectations for our next trip, probably speaking on behalf of Egbert as well,
Yes.
is some dukkana and saltfish.
We have data on that.
But I'm excited to come back and work with a larger group and really get some really impactful, powerful analytics that the country could benefit from.
That's great. Egbert.
And some very exciting stuff. I mean, there are several wow moments. We would like to call this the wow
Yes.
week. You know, aha moments. And just these, as we said, basic data that we already have, we're able to get powerful insights into it already. So imagine if we were able to collate and we're able to have it on a much larger scale, we'll be able to see what's happening behind that particular veil. And it's going to be very powerful. Operational efficiencies,
Yes.
we're able to achieve our strategic objectives, and as such, increase revenue, reduce costs, impact the lives of everyday citizens. And that's something that's exciting. So we want to partner with Antigua and Barbuda to be able to deliver such a platform.
Great. Is it okay
And
if
also,
final
just to
words?
add, yes, we have data in all different organizations. Say, for instance, in this workshop, we realized that we had statistics. Statistics would have like a vast amount of data. We had the Met Office, we had NODS. We were able to then collaborate between those three agencies to put data together, and it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Really,
So
yeah.
we really would like to be able to, you know, get rid of the individual silos
Yes. Yes.
and be able to come together as a government to provide data to each other so that we can then use the data collectively.
Okay. Sounds good. So you're back on the couch in November then?
For
Absolutely.
Sure. Yes.
Great. Did you enjoy the beaches at all while you were here?
At evenings, that's okay.
went
She
to
really,
beach at night?
yeah, she really good. That's it. Yeah. Why not? It's safe.
Yeah.
It is. No crime. I'm sure
Yes,
you've got
yes,
that
yes,
from the
yes,
database.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much
Thank
for
you
coming
very
in
much for
today.
having
us.
It's
Thank you.
really interesting, this discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking, of course, with Leslie Lee Fook, Egbert Irvin, and Isoki Perry, part of the Analytics Enablement Workshop that just concluded this past week, put on, of course, by the Ministry of Information, Broadcasting, Telecommunications, and Information Technology. It's time for top of the hour news. We'll be right back with that right after this.